A father's regret. Once upon a time in a small village, there lived a young girl named Helen. She was the only child of her parents, but the one thing her father, Mr. Turner, had always wished for was a son. He was a man who believed that sons were destined to carry on the family name, while daughters were seen as a burden, destined to one day be married off. He didn't have the patience for her, and his love seemed to be reserved for the sons that would never come. Helen could never understand her father's indifference toward her. She would do everything in her power to earn his love, clean the house, help in the garden, study hard, but it never seemed enough. Every time she looked into his eyes, she saw disappointment. Every word he spoke to her was filled with bitterness. "I wish you were a boy," he'd often mutter under his breath. Helen had heard these words so many times, they no longer hurt the way they once had. She had become numb to the constant rejection. Yet, in the quiet corners of her heart, she still longed for the day when her father would look at her with pride, not disdain. She wanted nothing more than for him to see her as worthy, to show him that she was capable of achieving great things, even though she was a girl. As the years passed, Helen grew into a young woman, still under the heavy weight of her father's expectations. Her dreams felt like distant stars, unreachable because her father never believed in her. But Helen never stopped dreaming. One cold, dreary afternoon, a letter arrived for Helen. It was from Drake, a distant relative she had never met, but who had heard about her potential and offered her an opportunity that would change her life forever. He had learned of her academic success and her quiet strength and had decided to help her achieve her dreams. The letter read, "Dear Helen, I have heard so much about your talents and determination. I know life has been hard for you, but I believe you are capable of achieving greatness. I am offering you a scholarship to attend a prestigious school in the city. It will be a fresh start, a chance to break free from the shadows of the past. I know your father may not understand, but you must follow your heart." The words were like a lifeline thrown to a drowning soul. Helen could barely believe it. Was it really happening? Could this stranger truly see her for who she was? She quickly packed her bags, without waiting for her father's permission. For once, she did not care if he would approve. As Helen left the house, she glanced back at the old, dilapidated home. Her father stood at the door, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She could feel the sting of his silent judgment, but she also felt something else, a glimmer of hope. She was finally leaving the place that had made her feel so worthless. The city was a world unlike anything Helen had ever known. The tall buildings, the fast-paced streets, the noise, it was overwhelming. But there was something magical about it, something that filled her with hope and excitement. She arrived at the school with nothing but a few belongings and a heart full of dreams. It was there that she met Joe, a fellow student who would become both a friend and a companion on her journey. Joe was everything that Helen had never known in a friend, kind, supportive, and encouraging. They spent hours together studying, discussing their ambitions, and dreaming about a future that seemed so distant back in her village. Helen began to excel in her studies, her natural intelligence finally being nurtured in an environment that valued her. As the years passed, Helen grew more confident in her abilities. She graduated at the top of her class, with honors that surprised everyone, including herself. The success that had once seemed impossible was now within her grasp. She felt proud of the woman she had become, and the achievements were all the sweeter because they had been earned through hard work, perseverance, and faith in herself. Meanwhile, back in the village, her father's life had not turned out as he had expected. The disappointment of not having a son had weighed heavily on him, and he had grown bitter and angry over the years. But as Helen's achievements became known, a deep sense of regret began to grow in him. He heard of her success in the city and could not escape the feeling that something precious had slipped through his fingers. He had never been there for her, never offered her the support she needed. And now, the world was praising the very daughter he had once rejected. At first, he tried to dismiss it, telling himself that it didn't matter, that he didn't need her approval. But as time went on, the guilt gnawed at him, like a constant ache in his chest. He could no longer escape the truth, he had failed her. It was on a warm summer day, years after Helen had left, when her father decided to visit the city. He didn't know what to expect, but the pull to see his daughter, to apologize for his past cruelty, had become too strong to ignore. He had heard whispers of her success, of the woman she had become, and he knew that this was his chance to make things right. When he arrived at the school, he asked for Helen. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited, wondering what kind of reception he would receive. He had no right to expect forgiveness, but he hoped, deep down, that she would allow him the chance to make amends. The door to the office opened, and there she stood. Helen was no longer the shy, uncertain girl who had left years ago. She was a woman, strong and graceful, with eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had endured much and overcome even more. She looked at him, and for a moment, there was silence between them. "I never thought I'd see you again," Helen said, her voice soft but steady. Her father's heart broke as he saw the mixture of emotions in her eyes, pain, sadness, and something else, something he could not quite name. "Helen, I know," she interrupted, her voice cracking with emotion. "You don't have to apologize. I've lived my life without your approval. I learned to believe in myself when no one else did." Her father's eyes filled with tears. He had never known the depth of her strength, the pain she had carried in silence. He had never realized how much his rejection had scarred her. Now, standing before him, the woman she had become was beyond anything he had ever imagined. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. I should have been there for you. I should have supported you, no matter who you were. I see now that you are so much more than I ever gave you credit for." Helen took a deep breath, the weight of his apology heavy in the air. For a long time, she had wished for this moment. But now that it was here, it wasn't the victory she had imagined. Instead, it was a quiet understanding. She had grown beyond her father's bitterness, beyond the pain he had caused her. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said, her voice calm. "You didn't know how to love me. But I learned to love myself, despite you. And now, I'm proud of who I've become." Her father looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her not as a disappointment, not as a girl he never wanted, but as a remarkable woman. His daughter, who had become everything he never thought possible. Years later, Helen became a successful entrepreneur, a leader in her field, admired by both men and women alike. Her father, though still struggling with his own sense of worth, had learned to respect her and, in his own way, love her. The relationship they built in those later years was one of quiet respect, of understanding that some wounds, once healed, could never be fully erased, but they could be embraced. And so, as time passed, Helen's life continued to flourish, a shining example of resilience and strength. She had learned that the world would not always treat her kindly because of her gender, but she had also learned that the greatest power came from within: belief in oneself, the willingness to stand tall in the face of adversity, and the capacity to forgive, even when it seemed impossible. Her father, in the end, regretted his actions, but he was forever grateful that he had witnessed the amazing person she had become. And in her heart, Helen carried the knowledge that despite all the pain, she had found the strength to rise above it. She had found success not because of her father's approval, but in spite of it, and that was the greatest victory of all.